I'm Jeffrey Lowe, and I'm going to tell you about an angel testimony that I had at the age of 21. I was serving in the Air Force, stationed in Florida. My mother had just had a surgery. They lived up near St. Louis, Missouri. So I got emergency leave to take off to go visit with my mother. The only vehicle I had at that young age was a motorcycle, a Honda 350 motorcycle. The prospect of renting a car at my youthful age never entered my mindset. So off I go in early November 1975, and I'm traveling up through a country road in Mississippi, a little town called Beaumont. And my chain is slipping on my motorcycle, and it's starting to kind of lose traction. And I go through this little town, and there's this one little gas station. A couple older men are there, and I pull in, and I find out that I have 2 metric Allen screws that are loose in my motorcycle side cover to my clutch, and that was what the problem was. And I'm wondering, is there any chance these fellows might have a screw, or 2 actually, that I could put this back together? Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to complete my trip. As it turned out, after they shuffled through a box of miscellaneous bolts, they did find 2 screws that fit my cover. Now, these 2 gentlemen, Gabe and Tony, they were twin brothers, and they were older then than what I am now, probably in the early 70s. And just a couple of country boys. One of the brothers had just picked up a refrigerator, had it in the back of his truck, and they were bringing the refrigerator to their little shop to have a place to put cold drinks in. Well, both of them had bad ailing backs, and they asked me, after they found the bolts for my bike, they asked me, being a young guy, could I help them get the refrigerator off the truck, which I did. And they thanked me for it. I went on about my way, went to St. Louis, visited with my mother. She recovered well, as it turned out. So on the 15th of November, I head back. And as I leave St. Louis, it is snowing, and I'm on a motorcycle. So it was slow go. It was a very cold ride. My dad thought that I was completely insane to ride a motorcycle to St. Louis in the early part of winter. But nonetheless, I get to Jackson, Mississippi that Saturday evening and stay at a hotel. And the next morning, I leave out to continue my trip to Florida. So I'd gone more than halfway, and I traveled down the road a little ways. And as I'm approaching that same town, Beaumont, Mississippi, on Highway 98 in the southern part of the state, unbeknownst to me, there was a piece of jagged beer bottle glass, broken glass, in the road that embedded into my rear tire, causing my bike, the tire to explode, to blow out, and the bike went down on its side. I'm still on the bike, and as it goes down, the fuel tank scrapes the asphalt and ruptures, and fuel spills out. The sparks ignite the fire. I find my legs on fire, and I hit the pavement eventually, went forward from the bike, and had a cut underneath my chin, and I had the fairing, the fiberglass fairing on the front of the bike shattered, and I had shrapnel of plastic embedded into various parts of my body. So I'm bleeding, the bike is burning, big pillows of black smoke, and I'm breathing that smoke. I wasn't knocked out, but I was nearly that way. But the main problem was I was on fire. And I'm taking my hands, I did have gloves on, and my legs are on fire from about the waist down, because that's where your legs are on the bike. You're straddling the fuel tank, so that's where the saturation of gas came. I'm unable to put the fire out because my clothes are saturated with fuel, and it looked like they'd almost be out and they'd come back. And I was frantic, and I was panicking. And I thought to myself, I'm going to die here. I actually had that feeling. It's a terrifying feeling to be 21, young, never married, didn't have a wife or family yet, or lived a life or had a career. And I thought, my goodness, it's going to end right here on this little road in Mississippi. I really thought that. It's not a feeling you ever want to have. I was not living for the Lord then. As a youth, I'd gone to Sunday school and to church because my parents made me a Baptist church, and I knew of Jesus, and I guess I was a believer, but I had no relationship with Jesus Christ at that time in my life. Certainly was not living for Christ, was not living a Christian life at all. And at that moment, when I was fearing death, I called out the one name that I knew would be the only name that could save me, the only person that could save me. And I screamed out, I said, Jesus, help me. I was frantic, and I said that 3 times, as I recall. And I was so, I guess, the injuries, the smoke inhalation, unsuccessfully patting the fire, my hands got 3rd-degree burns on my palms from that. After this accident, I could no longer play baseball. I was thinking I might break into minor league baseball at that time in my life, and I found that I can't catch a ball in the glove because the skin on your palm, when you're born, it's made tougher than the skin, normally would be. And it doesn't even have to be a fastball. If somebody throws a ball to me and it hits the pocket of the glove, I just can't hardly stand it. My skin didn't come back, especially on the left hand, as tough as it was. So anyway, I'm laying there in great pain, and after I cried out to Jesus, I just kind of fell back. I just thought, either Jesus is going to save me or I'm going to just perish here. I was done trying to put the fire out. I was short of breath, out of breath, frantic, and I was ready to give up. I was ready to give up on my life at that point. And shortly, and I mean shortly, after I cried out to Jesus, I heard glass breaking. And I raised up, I'd already laid back flat, and I raised my head up enough to see a brown grocery bag and a tall gentleman, an older gentleman, a slim fellow, a pair of brown pants and a tan jacket. He had this bag of groceries and he dropped it. And something in there was glass, maybe a jar of mayonnaise, pickles or something. And for some reason at the time I thought, oh my goodness, I've caused him to drop his groceries, as if that was a concern. But for some reason I thought that. And next thing I know, he's standing over me, and he grabs my military field jacket, which has a zipper, and it has snaps on it, and a drawstring at the waist. And I had everything snapped and drawn, because it was still pretty cool, even at that point in my trip. It was about 45 degrees. It was a Sunday morning, about 10:45, when this happened. He takes my field jacket, and he grabs it up here, and somehow, amazingly, it's just one motion, and it's off of me. There was no unzipping, there was no unsnapping, there was no untying a drawstring. And he takes the field jacket, after he removed it from my body, just in one brief moment, and he wraps it around my legs and holds it there until the fire was out. Meantime, I was so exhausted, I had breathed so much smoke, I had passed out. And the next thing I know, because I was an active duty military member of the Air Force, when the sheriff got there, they called a helicopter. And they airlifted me from the site of the crash to the hospital in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, about 30 miles away. And they're loading me on the helicopter, on a stretcher, and I come to a little bit, I wanted to thank the man that saved my life, but I didn't see him. And I started raising up, and there was a lady that was one of the EMTs that kept kind of like pressing me back down. She said, no, don't raise up, don't, just, be calm and lay there. And I said, but I've got to find him. And she said, find who? And I said, this older gentleman with the tan jacket, thin fellow, maybe 75 years old, 80, somewhere in there. And she briefly, I saw her looking around. She said, I don't see anybody. There was a few people from the community that kind of gathered around, as they do when accidents happen. And so she didn't see him. And I thought, well, they They whisked me on off to the hospital. Later that evening, I get a phone call, and there was a lady named Rebecca that run a general store there in Beaumont. She had been out there and seen what had happened, and somehow tracked down through the sheriff's office where they had taken me. And at that time, since I was military, they had airlifted me from Hattiesburg Hospital to Keesler Air Force Base, which is down by the coast. And she calls me and she tells me that her and other people in the town had prayed for me and continue to pray for me. And the next day I got flowers from them, from people in this little town, Beaumont, Mississippi. An amazing community with some really God-fearing people that I found out later. So if we fast forward, I was in a burn unit at Maxwell Air Force Base, Montgomery, Alabama, for about 4.5 months. And all total, from the time I was at Keesler to Maxwell till I got back to my home station at Eglin Field in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, was 7.5 months after the accident, before I got back to the base. And I was still on light duty for just about a year. And even to this day, I've had consequences from that accident, from tendon ruptures and injuries that have been attributed to that accident. But about a year after the accident, I got notice, I don't remember if it's by mail or phone, the sheriff contacted me, and he had what was left of my motorcycle, which was basically just, rusted metal frame. Everything else had burned up. He had it in his yard, and legally he's required to get the bike back to me if I want it, or I give him permission to dispose of it. So I wanted to go to that town and thank those people and try to find out who that man was. That was the main thing, the man that saved my life. So me and one of my buddies, we drove up there. He had a pickup truck, so we drove up to Beaumont. This is about a year later, in 1976. And so I meet the lady at the general store, Rebecca, and I'm talking to her about this gentleman, and I'm describing him to her. But when I said the sack of groceries, she said, "Whoa, wait a minute. Wait just a minute. That was Sunday morning. Where did he get the sack of groceries? Was he walking along the road when you came into town? Where was he?" I said, "I didn't see him along the road. I don't know where he came from." And then she went on to say, "I have the only store in town, and we're closed on Sunday. The next nearest store would be up in Hattiesburg. That's 30 miles away. I don't think that man went from Hattiesburg." So there's the mystery of the sack of groceries. Why he had those groceries. I've pondered that now for 45 years. There's some meaning to it. But here's the main thing, is that man was not known by anybody. This lady lived there. Rebecca lived in Beaumont, Mississippi her whole life. She knows everybody. She got the general store, the only store in town. That man was an angel. I didn't know that then. When I cried out to Jesus Christ to help me 3 times, God sent that man in the form of a human, but he was an angel, and he saved my life. And that's changed the course of my life ever since. I didn't immediately accept the Lord as my Savior after that. I went on up into my 30s before I really established a relationship and learned what it was about to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and to live for Him and to fulfill God's will in my life. Another little interesting sidebar to this story is going back to the time when my motorcycle was acting up on the way up to St. Louis. And I stopped at the little station with the twin brothers, Gabe and Tony, and I helped them with the refrigerator. They helped me with finding the 2 metric screws so I could get my bike back on the road, make my trip. I found out when we went back, I met Gabe, and he told me that morning, him and his wife were on their way to church, and that would have been about right. It was around 10:30, 10:45, and they were the ones. Gabe was the person that called the police to report the accident, and he called from Rebecca's store. Back in those days, they had payphones, and Rebecca had, actually she had two. I saw two there when I went back, and they had a booth, and then they had one kind of mounted on the wall of the store. But is that coincidence? The man that helped me, and then I helped him with the refrigerator. I've thought about that since then, and I thought about Gabe. Gabe is usually short for Gabriel. Who was Gabriel? He was an angel. It's just amazing to me when I've had 45 years since then to ponder these things, and I know that I won't know the full story until I get to heaven. But I know that God sent an angel in the form of this gentleman that extinguished the fire, because I'm sitting here telling you today, otherwise I knew I was going to perish right there. I tried as best I can to put the fire out and could not do so. And then the man that I had helped on the way up is the one that called the ambulance, the first person to actually see the accident, what had happened, and he reported it. His name is Gabriel, an angelic name. But anyway, I tell you the story today to assure anyone that's listening that Jesus Christ hears our prayers. He changed lives. And I found out it was, I'm trying to remember what year it was. Had left the Air Force and later joined the Army Reserve. And I was down at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, stationed there for a training session for 6 months. That's very near Beaumont. I had a weekend where I was off, and I drove down to Beaumont, and I met with Rebecca. And she had since sold her store to someone else, but she still lived in Beaumont. She said she'd be there her whole life. And I asked her about Gabe. I didn't have his address, and I wanted to go see Gabe. And she told me that he had passed away. She also told me this, that Gabe had said about me before he died. He had often said this, that God had a plan for that young man, that airman that had that motorcycle wreck in our town. God had a plan for his life. Gabe was a born-again Christian, I found out. And I think a lot of people were, because that town, when I came through that morning, it looked like a ghost town, because everybody was at church or headed to church. And so Beaumont, Mississippi has a special place in my heart because of this event, that my life was saved by an angel that was sent by my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And I hope that this testimony will have impact on you. And if you haven't given your heart to Jesus Christ, let me assure you that He loves you, and He will keep you, He will preserve you. And if you become a child of the living God and give your heart to Him, we know the Holy Spirit will seal us, and our salvation will be secure for all eternity, and we'll live in heaven with Jesus Christ one day. I hope this testimony will impact your heart in a positive way. Thank you for listening.